The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. Every story has a hinge, a single moment small enough to overlook and enormous enough to change everything that follows it. In the story most people know, Sirius Black arrived too late. Peter Pettigrew detonated a Muggle street, framed an innocent man for treason and 12 murders, and vanished into the sewers in rat form while the wizarding world danced in the streets above. Sirius went to Azkaban without a trial, Harry went to the Dursleys without a choice. And a decade of compounding damage accumulated in the silence between those two facts, in a cupboard under the stairs, in the hollow place where a family should have been, in the kind of wound that children carry when no one ever tells them they were worth showing up for. But what if Remus Lupin left a mark on a wall? What if the dead drop signal they had built together over 7 years of school, invisible to anyone who hadn't helped construct it, reached Sirius in time? What if, instead of charging alone toward Pettigrew and detonating his own grief on a public street, Sirius waited? What if Remus was already on the trail, and what the two of them found together in a London alley, in the raw hours after the world changed, was not an explosion, but a confession? What follows is the story of what could have been built from that single correction. It is the story of a godfather who kept a vow made in the ruins of a cottage, a girl from Oxford who was given access to a world that was already hers by right, a boy who grew up knowing what he was worth. And the patient, disciplined, sometimes brutal work of changing a broken system from the inside, not through luck or prophecy, but through preparation, family, and the courage required to do difficult things over a very long time. This is not a story about chosen ones. It is a story about what happens when the people who love you actually show up. The street existed in the kind of gap between other streets that cartographers never bothered naming. An alley of wet cobblestones and amber lamp glow, the air still carrying the ghost of rain that had stopped an hour earlier. It was the sort of place that certain kinds of people knew how to find, and everyone else walked past without registering. Tucked into a fold of London that did not appear on any map that mattered, and bore no sign that had not already been removed by someone who understood the value of directions only certain people could follow. In the dead hours of the morning, 2 days after Halloween had torn the wizarding world in half, 3 men who had once been the closest of friends arrived here by very different roads. Sirius Black had been following Peter Pettigrew for 6 hours. He had found the trail the way the marauders had always found each other when finding was necessary, not through owls or patronuses, which could be intercepted or traced, but through the dead drop system they had built over 7 years of school, a chain of invisible signals that no other person in the world knew existed. A specific mark on a specific wall in a specific part of London, worn into the brick with a charm that looked like an old stain until you knew what you were looking at. The mark said, "Something is wrong. Come here. Come now." Remus had left it. Sirius had arrived at the wall in the early evening and understood 2 things simultaneously: that Remus knew something, and that Remus was already moving, already following someone he didn't want to lose. So Sirius had followed Remus instead of Peter, which was the decision that changed everything. Because Sirius following Remus meant the thing that happened next was careful, and Sirius following his grief alone would have meant something that ended with 12 dead muggles and a prison cell. 6 hours of following later, the man they were both tracking had stopped moving. The alley was 15 feet wide and 40 feet deep. Peter stood at the far end, back to the wall, hunched shoulders, rapid eye movement, hands in and out of his pockets. A man who had decided stopping was less dangerous than continuing. He had not yet noticed Sirius. He had not noticed Remus either, positioned at the entrance with the lamplight behind him, a shape rather than a person. The ward went up before Peter turned. Not showy. The Black family never did showy. This one sealed sound within the alley's boundary. London continued outside, indifferent. Inside, everything said would stay. Peter turned. He saw Sirius first. His face did the thing that faces did when they encountered the thing they had believed was safely behind them. Not surprise exactly, but the collapse of something carefully maintained. "Padfoot, don't," Sirius said. Quiet, absolute, Remus stepped in from the entrance, and Peter looked between them with the rapid calculation of someone assessing exits and finding every assessment producing the same answer. There were no exits. "You went to him," Sirius said. "You went to Voldemort." "Sirius, I had no choice. He would have killed my family. I couldn't. James is dead." The words landed in the sealed air with the weight of true things said plainly. Not a weapon. A fact. The specific, devastating quality of something that had not yet been spoken aloud, becoming more real in the speaking of it, the way the worst things always did. "Lily is dead," Sirius said. "Harry is alive because of something Voldemort couldn't account for, and certainly because of nothing you did. And you have spent the past day telling yourself a story about what you did and why you did it. One step forward. I'm not interested in the story." "Sirius," Remus said, from behind Peter. Not a warning, a placement. He was positioned deliberately, and Peter could feel the deliberateness the way small animals felt the positioning of larger ones. "The confession," Sirius said. "All of it, in front of a witness." He reached into his robes and produced a vial, small, silver-stoppered, the glass holding the faint opalescence of something that was not quite ordinary. "Or the vial. Your choice, Peter, but it is the last free choice you make tonight." Peter looked at the vial for a long time. He had studied it once, in a Hogwarts library that contained books it probably shouldn't have, when all four of them had been 17 and brilliant, and afraid of nothing in the particular way of people who had not yet been given a reason to be afraid of anything. He knew exactly what it was. He looked at Remus. Remus's face was the face of a man who had been making himself hope for 24 hours and had finally arrived somewhere beyond hope, waiting now only for the confirmation of what he already knew. Peter took the vial. He drank it. The confession lasted 11 minutes. Remus recorded every word with a dictation quill he had carried in his coat pocket since he left the mark on the wall, because he had known, arriving at the signal, that if they found Peter, they would need a record. Because records were the only thing that worked against the kind of erasure that frightened and powerful people deployed after the fact. Under the potion, Peter's voice was flat. Dates, meetings, dark rooms, the night of Halloween. When it was over, Remus sealed the scroll. Sirius bound Peter's wrists with a cord from his own wrist. A black family binding, blood-keyed. The kind that recognized the magical signature of the person it held and adjusted accordingly. It could not be gnawed through in rat form. Sirius had known this when he wove it. He had been waiting to use it for a long time. "Ministry," Sirius said. "Directly, not through Fudge's office," Remus said. "Crouch, crouch," Sirius agreed. Tonight, the ministry official arrived in the gray pre-dawn hours. Not Bartemius Crouch himself, his deputy. A man named Harker, whose entire professional function was to be present at situations requiring official presence before the senior official was ready to be seen. Harker had spent 15 years arriving early at difficult scenes. He was not ready for this one. A recorded confession, a bound prisoner, a witness of unimpeachable standing. And Sirius Black standing in a ministry waiting room before sunrise with the expression of a man who had done an administration's job for it, and was waiting for the administration to catch up. Harker looked at the scroll, at Peter, sitting in the corner like someone whose options had all been accounted for. Then, at Sirius. "Lord Black," he said. Sirius had not introduced himself by title, but Harker's training included recognizing certain people by their bearing. "This will require a formal inquiry before. That is why I am here before sunrise instead of sleeping," Sirius said, "which I would strongly prefer." He placed the scroll on the desk. "The inquiry will find what the confession documents. When it does, I will expect a formal statement of exoneration by end of week. My family's counsel, Adrian Voss, will be present to receive it." Harker reached for the scroll. "One more thing." The hand stopped. "The events of this night are not to be described, in any official communication or informal one, as a situation that required the detention or questioning of Sirius Black. I was not detained. I was not questioned. I arrived here voluntarily with evidence, and I am leaving voluntarily, with the expectation that the evidence will be processed correctly. If the framing of the official record does not match what I have just described, Adrienne Voss will know within the hour. The silence that followed was the silence of a room where someone had just been reminded where the actual authority resided. "Yes, Lord Black," Harker said. Sirius left the ministry building when the morning was still cold and pale, the sky the particular washed-out color it turned after a night of rain had emptied itself out. He stood on the pavement and looked at the street and did not move for a moment. 31 hours without sleep. A traitor tracked, confessed, and delivered. An administration reminded of its place. He had not cried yet. He knew he would. Not here, not in front of Harker's building with its official flags and its polished bronze lettering. Not anywhere that required him to be Lord Black while he did it. He apparated to Godric's Hollow. The cottage was ruined the way places where something enormous is torn through, and the tearing was the last thing that happened. He walked through it carefully, not from fear of physical danger, but because some floors deserved to be walked on carefully. He found the upper room where Hagrid had retrieved Harry the night before, the rescue arranged so quickly that a small blue cradle had been left behind, its silk lining the color of midnight, untouched by the destruction all around it. The cradle was empty, but the silk held the impression of where a child had been. Sirius put his hand on that impression and stayed very still. "I'm coming," he said, to the outline of a small body that was no longer there. "I'm coming to get you. And I swear to you, on this house, on your parents, on everything they built and everything they were. You are not going to grow up the way I did. You are not going to grow up afraid. You are not going to grow up alone." He stood there in the cold morning light and let himself feel the full weight of what the world had lost 2 nights ago. Then he straightened his back and walked out into November. He began, with total and quiet purpose, to plan. Grimmauld Place had been many things across 4 centuries: a fortress, a monument, a prison dressed in velvet, cold the way houses were cold when they had never been asked to be warm. The portraits watched every arrival with suspicion. The portrait of Walburga Black, Sirius's mother, alive until the early spring of Harry's 4th year, shrieked the first time Harry knocked over a hat stand. By the 3rd time, Sirius had hung curtains over her, and Harry had learned to navigate the hat stand. Walburga's objections became background noise. You noticed them for a while, and then you simply didn't. Sirius did not transform the house dramatically. He had neither the energy nor the inclination for grand gestures in those early years, when most of his effort went into the legal battle, the exoneration documentation, and the extended custody proceedings that the ministry had attempted to initiate on the grounds that Sirius, despite being fully cleared, was still considered an irregular choice of guardian for the most famous child in the wizarding world. Adrienne Voss had handled the ministry's concerns with the same elegant efficiency she brought to everything. The custody matter was resolved before Harry's 2nd birthday. What changed in Grimmauld Place changed slowly. The kitchen made functional, the library reorganized into a system a person could use, the 3rd floor cleared of decades of accumulated objects nobody had ever used or discarded. Kreacher did most of the cooking. Kreacher also made clear, through strategic muttering and even more strategic disappearances, that every change was a personal affront to everything he held sacred. Sirius had decided to interpret this as confirmation that the changes were working. Harry, at age 3, had made friends with Kreacher the way very small children made friends with difficult people, by not yet knowing that the difficulty was supposed to matter. He brought the old elf drawings, rendered in crayon on torn-out notebook pages, abstract and enthusiastic, and entirely unidentifiable as any particular subject. Kreacher accepted each one with the expression of someone being deeply insulted by a gift. Sirius found the whole collection, carefully stacked behind the water heater. On a gray January afternoon, when Harry was 4. He told no one. It was Kreacher in the end who told them about Regulus. Not willingly. Not in words. At first it came out in pieces, the way old grief came out of proud and private people, through the cracks in other conversations, through what Kreacher muttered when he thought no one was listening closely enough. Harry, at 5, listened to everything closely enough. He brought what he'd heard to Sirius the way he brought everything he didn't understand, directly, without ceremony, because Sirius had always told him there was no such thing as a stupid question, only an unfinished one. Kreacher says Master Regulus died a hero. What does that mean? Sirius had been quiet for a long time after that, long enough that Remus, sitting across the kitchen table, had put down his tea and waited. What it meant, assembled over 3 separate evenings with Creature and the patience of 2 grown men who needed to understand, and 1 small boy who fell asleep in his chair by the end of the first evening and had to be carried upstairs. What it meant was this. Regulus Black, younger brother, once a Death Eater, had changed his mind. He had discovered, in the last year of his life, what Voldemort had done to make himself unkillable: the dark magic, the fragmentation of a soul across hidden objects, the anchors that kept death from taking hold. He had been horrified by the depth of it, the way even committed dark wizards could be horrified by a particular crossing of a line. And he had done something about it. He had taken Creature to a cave on the Scottish coast, made the old elf drink a terrible potion to retrieve the locket hidden at the basin's bottom, and brought it back to Grimmauld Place with a note inside it signed R.A.B., a promise that he intended to destroy the real thing before Voldemort could use it. He had died before he worked out how. The locket had been in Creature's keeping ever since, locked in the cabinet in his small room beneath the stairs, wrapped in a tea-cloth that had once belonged to Regulus, and which Creature had never washed. Sirius held it in his hands for a long time the night Creature finally produced it. It was warm in a way that objects should not be warm. It had weight beyond its size. It was the weight of something that had been fed. He kept it, Sirius said. He was not talking to Remus or to Creature. He was talking to a version of his brother he had spent 15 years believing he had understood. He pulled it out of that cave and he kept it, and he was trying to. Yes, Remus said quietly. He was. Sirius set the locket down on the table between them. We'll need to understand what destroys it, he said, after a moment, in the tone he used when he was moving from feeling into function, because function was the only place his grief had anywhere to go. And what else there might be like it. One problem at a time, Remus said. Yes, Sirius said. He looked at the locket. But we start this one now. Lily's notebook arrived 8 months later, recovered from a box of her belongings that Alice Longbottom had been keeping in storage before the attack that took Alice and Frank out of the world in every way that mattered. Neville's grandmother, Augusta, found the box while settling their affairs and sent it to Sirius without annotation, because Augusta Longbottom was not a woman who required annotation. The notebook was green-covered, small, Lily's handwriting in the rapid style she used for research. The inside cover read, Accidental Magic and High-Aptitude Muggle-Born Children, a Pattern Study. Sirius read it in one sitting. He brought it to Remus the next morning and told him to read page 14. Remus read it, then read it again. She found a child, he said. She was tracking several. But there's one she kept returning to. A girl in London. Sirius pointed to the notation at the bottom of the page. A 6-year-old is not supposed to produce coherent runic patterns accidentally. That doesn't happen. It's not supposed to, Remus agreed. Lily thought it did. In very specific children. A pause. She never finished the theory. Remus looked at the name at the bottom of the page for a moment. Granger, Hermione Jean. She'd be 6 now, Remus said. Yes, Sirius said. Which means we have time, if we move correctly. The correct way of approaching the Grangers took 4 months to establish, not because the approach itself was complicated, but because what Sirius was proposing required a legal framework that did not quite exist in a form anyone had used in over a century. And building it properly was more important than building it quickly. He had found the mechanism in the Black family's own archive, a Ward of Association designation, last formally invoked in the mid-19th century. Designed for the precise situation of a magical child with non-magical parents who needed a formal wizarding family connection without requiring adoption or severance of the birth family's authority. It gave the child a legal footing in both worlds simultaneously. Adrienne Voss spent 2 days confirming it was real before she looked at Sirius with the expression of someone updating a professional opinion significantly upward. The document she drafted over 3 weeks was meticulous. It gave the Grangers full parental authority at all times. It gave Hermione the unilateral right to end the arrangement at any point without legal consequence. It established the education provision as a formal scholarship structure, because what Grimmauld Place could offer was an education, not a replacement family, and that distinction mattered in both the legal and human texture of what it would actually become. The Grangers were dentists. They dealt in evidence. when Remus presented the complete information in his most measured academic manner. Organized, sourced, beginning with what was true and building from there, they listened without interrupting and asked precise follow-up questions, and by the end of the meeting they were not persuaded so much as satisfied. This was, Sirius thought, the most respectable response anyone had ever had to the existence of magic. The first meeting with Hermione happened on a Thursday in late spring. She sat at the kitchen table with the posture of a 6-year-old who had been told this meeting was important and had decided that importance required sitting up very straight. She had brown eyes and brown hair and the expression of someone who was already doing calculations about the people across the table and hadn't reached a conclusion yet. "What kind of school is it?" she said. "A private one," Sirius said. "Very small. 2 students currently." "2," Hermione said, in the tone of someone noting an irregularity in data. "1 teacher and sometimes 2. Remus, Professor Lupin, teaches during the day. I teach Tuesday and Thursday evenings. There's also a specialist who comes for ancient runes." "I know what runes are," Hermione said. "I've been reading about them." Mrs. Granger looked at her daughter with the expression of someone who was very used to this. They signed the documents the following Tuesday. Hermione brought a small suitcase and a canvas bag containing 11 books, which she had selected herself and organized by subject. She shook Sirius's hand at the door of Grimmauld Place with the gravity of someone concluding a business arrangement. Harry was in the library. Sirius had thought carefully about where the 2 of them should first meet, not the kitchen, which was Creature's territory and produced unpredictable social dynamics, and not the dining room, which still carried the formal chill of generations of performative Black family meals. The library was neutral ground, full of things, demanding of nothing, the kind of space where people who were primarily interested in learning could simply begin. Harry was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book open in his lap that was clearly too advanced for a 5-year-old and was clearly being read anyway. Hermione stopped in the doorway. She looked at the room, methodically, from left to right. And then she looked at Harry. "What are you reading?" she said. Harry looked up. He assessed her the same way she had assessed the adults downstairs. Quick, systematic, not unfriendly, but not performatively friendly either. "History of the 4 Founders," he said. "Sirius says it's boring. He's wrong." "Which edition?" Hermione said. Harry checked the cover. 1842. "The Slytherin chapter has errors. The revised edition is better for the founding period." She walked into the library without asking if she could, and stood before the shelves with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. "Which shelf is Founders?" "3rd from the left." "Top row." She went to the 3rd shelf from the left. Sirius, standing in the doorway, watched this for approximately 45 seconds. 2 children who had independently determined that the most interesting thing in the room was books, and had therefore found the only common ground they needed without requiring any help from him at all. He left them to it. The training room on the 3rd floor took shape over years, incrementally, the way good things took shape when the people building them knew what they actually needed and weren't in a hurry to perform the building. Remus claimed the left section. Bookshelves, a long chalkboard, 2 child-sized chairs and 1 adult one, organized with the quiet warmth of someone who had spent his whole life searching for the right students and had finally found them. Sirius claimed the right section, a sprung practice floor laid over the original slate, padded walls, training wands and a case on the windowsill. Calibrated for children rather than fully powered, because Sirius's own training wands had been full-powered at age 7, and that was exactly one of the things he was correcting. Hermione claimed the center by incremental occupation, a small desk first, then a 2nd shelf, then a standing board covered in notation that began as a copy of Remus's lessons and evolved into something distinctly her own. Nobody suggested she take the center. She simply put her desk there, and it was obvious. Remus taught the way a man taught who had spent years thinking about how teaching should work and had finally been given the latitude to test his conclusions. He did not correct pronunciation before his students understood why an incantation worked. He began every lesson with a question he didn't answer, letting Harry argue his way toward a conclusion and Hermione locate hers, the combination arriving at answers faster than either of them reached things alone. He told Sirius in their weekly kitchen debrief over tea that he had never encountered 2 students whose thinking was this complementary this early. "You built it," Sirius said. "I didn't build it," Remus said. I just didn't prevent it. Sirius thought about that for several days. The occlumency was Sirius's, harder than either child expected, not just defense against intrusion, but a broader practice of mental organization, knowing precisely where everything was and the difference between choosing to reveal something and having it taken. Harry built it slowly, with grinding dedication. Hermione mastered the organizational architecture immediately and struggled with the emotional regulation component. She could catalog her mind with precision, but putting things in the catalog she didn't want to look at was a different skill, and it was the one that mattered. Sirius adjusted the approach and said nothing about the adjustment until it was working. The Black family function that summer brought a Carrow cousin whose function was to occupy a position slightly below where he believed he occupied and compensate through the performance of contempt toward anyone he calculated could not answer it. He saw Hermione at the far end of the formal dinner table, 7 years old, sitting beside Harry, learning the etiquette of a wizarding dinner with the composed attention of someone filing information in real time, and he did not lower his voice when he said what he said. Sirius set down his wine glass. Hermione Granger, he said, in the register he used when he was speaking for the record rather than the room, is a ward of association of House Black, and a guest in this house under the full protection of that house. If you have something to say about her, you are saying it about House Black's judgment in extending that protection. Which means you are saying it to me. A pause. I would think carefully about whether you have something to say. The cousin thought carefully. He had nothing to say. At the far end of the table, Hermione was watching Sirius with the expression she wore when she was updating her understanding of how something worked. Harry was watching the cousin with the expression of someone who had identified a mechanism and was filing it away for later. The dinner continued. The cousin ate quietly. The mechanism was filed. The near miss in training happened in the autumn when Harry was 7. The session had been running well, too well, which Sirius recognized afterward as the warning sign it always was, because sessions that ran too well developed a false confidence that made people forget to account for what they hadn't yet practiced. Harry had been working on a reflected stinging hex from the Black Battle Arts Manual, had hit the timing correctly 3 consecutive times, and on the 4th attempt adjusted his grip in a way that was marginally different, and did not notice that it was different. The reflected hex went sideways. It caught Hermione in the shoulder at partial power, and she went down on the practice floor with a sound that was not loud, but felt like sounds that weren't supposed to happen. Harry was kneeling beside her before Sirius had crossed half the room. His face carried an expression Sirius had never seen on him before. Not guilt, something more fundamental. The dawning understanding that caring about a specific person and harming that specific person were not mutually exclusive, and that this was a fact he would carry forward. Hermione sat up, pressed her hand to the shoulder, self-assessed. It's a bruise, she said. I was watching your timing and not your grip. We both made mistakes. She looked at Harry with the direct honesty she used when something actually mattered. We add grip check to the pre-exercise protocol. We don't make this specific mistake again. Okay, Harry said. Good, help me up. He helped her up. Sirius stood at the edge of the floor and did not interfere, because what had just happened needed to happen without interference. That evening he tightened the safety protocols and gave them to Hermione in writing because that was how she retained things, and to Harry verbally because that was how he did. Harry recited them back unprompted the following morning. The ministry inspector arrived in the early spring, sent by the Department of Magical Education with the organized skepticism of someone who had spent 15 years determining whether unconventional magical educations produced competent children or merely confident ones. Her name was Edwina Price. She expected parlor tricks and family history. She found a 9-year-old discussing shield magic at 4th year standard, a 7-year-old demonstrating 3 defensive reflexes unprompted, and at the training room center, an ongoing Project Cross, referencing 3 runic systems for ward construction, annotated citations. She sat in the kitchen afterward and looked at her assessment form. The girl's runic work, she said. She found the texts herself, Sirius said. We gave her the more advanced ones when she ran out of introductory material. Price wrote something in the margin of the form. I'll need to return in 6 months, she said. Procedurally, of course, Sirius said. The 6-month assessment will be thorough. "I expect so," Sirius said. By that afternoon he had received 3 owls from people who knew Edwina Price professionally, each asking in various formulations what exactly was being done at Grimold Place, and whether it was true that a ministry inspector had spent 45 minutes on an assessment she had expected to complete in 15. Sirius replied to none of them. He went upstairs to where Remus was running an afternoon session, stood in the doorway and watched Harry and Hermione work through a case study on the Goblin rebellions, and thought about the vow he had made in a ruined cottage on a November morning that now felt like a different lifetime. Not afraid. He was building it. The first day of September arrived the way consequential days often did, looking entirely ordinary from the outside, the sky doing nothing dramatic, the street in front of Grimold Place going about its business without acknowledgement that the 2 children currently standing on its pavement were about to walk through a wall into the rest of their lives. Harry wore dark gray robes. Hermione wore deep blue. The Black family tailor's work was visible in the fall of the fabric if you knew what quality looked like, which most 11-year-olds did not. Remus had won a 2-day argument with Sirius about visible crests. They're 11, not delegates. Sirius and Remus walked them to the barrier at King's Cross. Sirius stopped at the pillar between platforms 9 and 10 and did something that surprised Harry. He put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him directly, the way he looked at things he was serious about. "You already know more than most of them will learn in 7 years," he said. "That is not an excuse to be unkind about it. It is a responsibility to be useful with it." "I know," Harry said. "And write," Sirius said. "More than you think you need to." "I'll write," Harry said. Sirius held his gaze for another moment and then pulled him into a brief, firm embrace that Harry returned without ceremony. Because they were not people who made ceremonies out of things that were simply true. Remus hugged Hermione, who hugged him back with slightly more visible feeling. "The 3rd-floor corridor," Remus said quietly, over her shoulder. "We'll be careful," she said. "I know you will," he said. "Be careful anyway." They went through the barrier together. The platform opened around them, scarlet engine, coal smoke. The organized chaos of hundreds of families saying goodbye with varying degrees of composure. Trunks and owls and at least one lost toad that a round-faced boy named Neville Longbottom was already searching for with the resigned expression of someone accustomed to things getting away from him. Harry and Hermione paused just past the barrier and did what they had been taught to do in every new environment. Read it. Exits first, then the people, then the space between the people, then the sense of the noise. "Second carriage from the front," Harry said. "The 3rd has a door handle that's been worn by a sticking charm. You can see it from here." Hermione looked. "Second," she agreed. They moved. The compartment they chose was occupied by one red-haired boy who had clearly been hoping it would stay empty, and was managing the discovery that it wouldn't with the good-natured resignation of someone who had grown up sharing space with 5 brothers and had made his peace with it some years ago. Ron Weasley looked up when they slid the door open. He assessed them in the same window of time they assessed him. Quick, mutual, producing in both parties the same general conclusion. No immediate threat. Possible interest. "Mind if we sit?" Harry said. "Go ahead," Ron said. "I already checked. Everywhere else is actually full." "The compartment 3 down has space," Hermione said, stowing her bag with efficiency. "But the window seal is gone on the right side. It'll be cold by Yorkshire." Ron looked at her. "How do you know that?" "I looked at it when we came through." Ron looked at Harry. Harry shrugged the way meant, "She's right. Don't bother verifying." Ron appeared to accept this as a reasonable social framework and returned to the chocolate frog he had been opening. The frog card was Dumbledore. He'd already got 6 of those, he said, and launched into a cheerful account of his brother's collective card collection with the unself-conscious ease of someone for whom talking to strangers had simply never been a category distinct from talking to people. By the time the train had cleared London and the sky outside had opened into green fields, Harry had concluded that Ron Weasley was exactly the kind of person who made rooms feel more habitable just by being in them. Draco Malfoy arrived 20 minutes out of the city, Crabbe and Goyle behind him, in the formation of people who had learned to move with weight before they learned to move with purpose. Malfoy looked at Harry with the expression of someone confirming a piece of intelligence. "Harry Potter," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Draco Malfoy." The name delivered with the particular weight of someone who had been told all his life that his name carried weight, and was now testing the theory. Harry looked at him with the feel of attention that was neither hostile nor deferential, simply present. Malfoy, yes. The pause that followed had texture. Malfoy had prepared for two reactions, impressed or antagonistic. He had received neither, and the gap in his script was visible. He looked at Hermione. "And who are you?" with the tonal addition that turned a question into a ranking. "Hermione Granger, Ward of House Black." Something moved in Malfoy's expression despite his control of it. The Black name was not receivable without acknowledgement regardless of what you thought about its current holder. "Sirius Black," he said. "Lord Black," Hermione said pleasantly, in the tone of someone making a correction that was also, very precisely, a small wound. Yes, Ron had stopped chewing. Malfoy recalibrated. "Slytherin, that's where the right sort end up." "I imagine it is," Harry said. "For some people, Potter and Malfoy, we could be friends." Harry considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. "I don't think so," he said. "But thank you." Entirely courteous. Devastating, not because of the refusal but because the tone communicated the offer had been considered and found insufficient. He left. Ron exhaled slowly. "That was really something," he said. "Was it?" Harry said. "His father is on the board of governors. People don't usually talk to him like he was ordinary." "He is ordinary," Harry said, watching the fields move past the window. "He just hasn't been told." McGonagall met the first years in the entrance hall with the precise efficiency of someone conducting a process she had refined across 4 decades into its absolute essentials. She looked at Harry like someone measuring a person against what they'd been told about them, found the measurement interesting, and returned to the business of organizing 40 first years, which always demanded priority over everything else. Neville Longbottom, reunited with his toad at last, stood near the back of the group with the expression of someone steeling themselves for something large. "Trevor came back," he told Harry, when Harry turned to look. "Good name for a toad," Harry said. Neville looked surprised to have been addressed, then pleased. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "I think so too." The Great Hall received them with the full weight of 417 students who had been anticipating one particular name on the sorting list and were now in its presence. The Sorting Hat's song rang out across the candlelit ceiling, and the enchanted clouds moved above the beams, and the hat was placed, one by one, on 11-year-old heads, and sorted them into the places they would spend the next 7 years becoming who they were going to be. Neville Longbottom was sorted into Gryffindor, and the table received him warmly, particularly the Weasley twins in the 3rd row, who had apparently been told good things about him and immediately set about making him feel that arrivals were welcome here. Potter, Harry, the Great Hall went quiet with a particular quality, the quiet of a room that has been anticipating something and is suddenly in its presence. Inside the hat's darkness, well, you've had an unusual preparation. Yes, Gryffindor courage, obviously, but there's calculation here too, strategic patience. The Black education. Slytherin would use you well. Slytherin wouldn't suit me. I know what I am. Do you? Not septically, with genuine curiosity. I'm someone who was given tools, training, and a family. I intend to use all 3 for something worth using them for. That's Gryffindor, not the reckless kind. The other kind. A pause. The other kind. Yes, I think that's exactly right, Gryffindor. The table erupted. Harry walked to it at his own pace, past the Slytherin table where Malfoy watched with the expression of someone whose prediction had underperformed. Hermione's sorting took 44 seconds. She sat beside Harry and said, without looking at him, "The hat considered Ravenclaw." "I know." "What did you tell it?" "That I was loyal to the people I chose," she said, "and that the people I chose were here." Ron Weasley, across the table and several chicken portions into the feast, was in the process of forming the conclusion that whatever the next 7 years held, it was going to be considerably more interesting than his brothers had described. Snape taught potions the way a man taught who had decided that authority through fear was more reliable than authority through respect, and had enough personal evidence to have reached that conclusion sincerely. He moved through the dungeon classroom with the economy of someone who knew where every object in the room was and had never needed to look for anything. He stopped at the front. He looked at the class. His gaze moved across first-year faces with the speed of cataloging, and stopped on Harry's with the stop of someone encountering a thing they had been anticipating, and finding that anticipation and reality did not match in the ways they had expected. "Potter, tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" A trap question, not a teaching question, a performance question. "Draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The efficacy depends significantly on preparation of the saprophoros bean. The standard instructions advise cutting, but crushing produces a higher juice yield and better results." Snape was still. "Where did you read that?" "Black Family Potion Notes. The crushing technique is documented in a 1743 addition to the standard method." The class registered the sense of the silence that followed. In the 6th week, Snape stopped at Neville Longbottom's cauldron, which was producing a color that was not the correct color and had the trajectory of something heading somewhere bad. "Longbottom, what is the current temperature of your potion?" Neville went pale. He did not know. This was visible. "Excuse me," Harry said, from 2 benches along. Snape turned. "The heat isn't the primary issue." The porcupine quills went in before the cauldron was taken off the fire. "If you reduce the flame now and add bicorn powder, 2 grams, you can stabilize it before it sets." He looked at Neville, not at Snape. "I'd be interested in your assessment of the sequence error, Professor." Snape looked at the cauldron. Then at Harry, with the expression of someone who has had the mechanism of their point identified and named in front of the audience it was designed for. "Bicorn powder," he said to Neville. 2 grams. Now, he moved on. Hermione, beside Harry, kept her eyes on her own cauldron, which was the correct color at the correct consistency. She said nothing. Her saying nothing was its own response. Neville looked across at Harry with an expression that was complicated and grateful in equal measure. Harry gave him a small nod, the kind that meant, "Get it right the second time." "That's all it takes." Neville got it right the second time. The 3rd-floor corridor announced itself not with noise, but with structure. Harry felt it on the 4th day of term, a layered magical density, the outermost layer a ministry-signed keep-out enchantment, and beneath it something older and more complex, what the Black family ward texts classified as a fluid security system, a ward without a fixed shape that responded to approach by becoming whatever the approaching situation required it to be. He kept walking. He told Hermione at breakfast. "Dumbledore's work on the outer layer," she said. She had been near the corridor the previous evening and logged the runic signature in the stonework. "The inner structure is older. And recent, someone put something in there and built containment around it." "Who would Dumbledore hide something for?" Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "The better question is who he's hiding it from." They spent 3 weeks watching, not the corridor, but the people around it. The staff who avoided it on a consistent trajectory. Quirrell, who avoided it in the different way of someone trying not to look like he was thinking about it, which produced precisely the opposite effect. Quirrell had been wrong since the first defense class, not in any single identifiable way, the stammer too consistent to be anxiety, and too inconsistent to be a speech impediment, the turban an unusual choice for a man who had worn none in the records Sirius maintained, but in the cold. A specific, radiating cold in certain moments that the Black Battle Arts Manual documented as a diagnostic indicator of particular dark workings. Cold as a byproduct of something feeding on ambient magic. When Hermione's ward sensing detected a change in the corridor's internal structure, something inside had been approached and turned back, they waited 1 more week. When Quirrell attempted again on a Friday, they went in on Saturday. The trapdoor led downward through 6 layers. The first, the Ministry Keep-Out seal, dissolved when Hermione counter-signed it with the Black family's authorization seal. The second was Devil's Snare. Harry conjured light and held it steady while she moved through. The third was a chamber of winged keys, hundreds of them churning through the air like an enchanted storm. A resonance diagnostic identified the correct one in under a minute. The fourth was a giant chessboard. Hermione stood at the board's edge, in the sense of total engagement she reserved for problems that were genuinely interesting, and moved 7 pieces without hesitation. The path opened. But before the chessboard, at the top of the trapdoor, they had encountered Fluffy, Hagrid's 3-headed dog, enormous and terrible, each head tracking movement independently. Harry had come prepared. He produced a small enchanted music box from the Black family's collection of arcane instruments, a curiosity Sirius kept on the library's third shelf, and wound it once. 3 massive sets of eyes glazed. 3 heads lowered. They crossed the trapdoor quickly, quietly, and did not look back. The 5th layer was a logic puzzle in 7 bottles. Hermione read the parchment once and pointed to the smallest bottle without sitting down. Harry drank it. The black fire parted. The mirror of Arist stood at the far end of the chamber. And in front of it, Quirrell, the stammer gone, the cold enormous. What followed was not a fight in the conventional sense. Harry walked to the mirror like someone who had identified the danger and decided that acknowledged danger was less threatening than unacknowledged danger. His reflection reached into its pocket. The stone arrived in his hand, small and warm. Behind him, Hermione dismantled the chamber's stonework, one runic thread at a time, and rebuilt it as a containment ward. Quirrell found himself unable to move. The cold in the room became furious when it understood what was happening. Not Quirrell's fury, the fury of the thing that wore him. "You should not be here," it said. "Neither should you," Harry said. He walked back through the black fire. Hermione released the ward the moment he was through. They heard Quirrell fall. McGonagall's office at 2 a.m. was warm and lamp-lit, and the headmistress listened to their account like someone receiving accurate information and deciding what to do with accuracy rather than correcting inaccuracy. When they finished, she looked at the stone for a long moment and then said, in the tone she used when credit was precisely owed, "You're your mother's son." Harry said nothing, but the sense of his stillness was the stillness of someone receiving something they had not expected and did not quite know what to do with yet. "Go to bed," McGonagall said. They went. The writing appeared on the wall on a Wednesday morning in October of their 2nd year, and Harry read it on his way to breakfast the way he read everything, as information before it was anything else. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Below the words, Mrs. Norris hung suspended in the corridor's torchlight, eyes filmed with the feeling of something interrupted rather than ended. Petrified, not dead. Harry stood in the emptying corridor and looked at the words, then at the cat, then at the ceiling where the pipes ran in the configuration he had been quietly tracking since the 3rd week of term. Not rats, not water pressure. Something else moving in them with the singular rhythm of one large creature navigating a system built for something much smaller. He had not told anyone about the pipes yet. He went to find Hermione. She had already been to the library. 3 books were open on the Gryffindor common room table, her notation already dense in the margins, and she felt like focus she reached when she had identified a problem and was not interested in being redirected from solving it. Ron Weasley sat across from her with a piece of toast and the expression of someone who had arrived at breakfast to find that breakfast had become a research session and had decided to make the best of it. "Basilisk," Hermione said when Harry sat down. "Yes," Harry said. "The pipes. You've been tracking something. Since the 2nd week. I didn't know what it was until now." She looked at him with the expression she wore when a piece of information reorganized the structure of what she was working on. "What do you hear in them?" "A voice," Harry said. "Parseltongue." Ron set down his toast. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Not random, then, controlled. Something is directing it." She turned to a page she had already marked. "Ginny Weasley has been writing in a diary since August. I noticed she was losing weight in September. I noticed she was spending time in the library doing something that wasn't reading. I didn't connect it until this morning." Ron's expression moved through several things quickly. "Ginny? My sister Ginny?" "The diary is a control mechanism," Hermione said, looking at Ron with the direct honesty she used when softening something would only cost time. "Whatever it contains has been using her. She won't know the full extent of it herself." Ron pushed back his chair and had to be gently, firmly talked out of going immediately to confront whoever had given his sister the diary by Harry pointing out that they didn't know yet, and that moving without knowing was how things got worse. Ron sat back down. He ate none of the remaining toast. He stayed at the table for the entire research session like someone who had decided that being useful here was the only acceptable option. Harry found Ginny in the corridor outside History of Magic and stood in front of her like someone who has information that belongs to the person they're talking to. "The diary," he said. Her face did the thing that faces did when the thing they had been concealing was named, not surprise at the naming, but the collapse of the energy required to maintain the concealment. It was the only thing that listened, she said after a moment. In September, when everything was new and I didn't know anyone, it responded. It felt like a friend. That's what it was designed to feel like, Harry said. She reached into her bag and gave him the diary. Her hands were not entirely steady, and she was working very hard not to let them be. Is Hermione angry? She said. Because she figured it out and she blamed herself for not identifying it faster, Harry said. Ginny blinked. That makes no sense. No, Harry agreed. But that's how she is about problems she thinks she could have caught earlier. Go to the hospital wing. Tell Madame Pomfrey you've been having memory gaps. She won't ask more than you want to tell her. Ginny went. Ron, waiting at the end of the corridor, fell into step beside his sister with the look of someone who had decided that being a brother was the most important thing he could be right now, and was going to do it without making a production of it. The diary's true nature took 6 hours to confirm. Hermione sat with it in the library's hidden corner, not touching it, reading its magical signature through a diagnostic framework assembled from the Black family's dark arts detection texts, and what she found at the end of those 6 hours required 10 minutes of sitting still before she said it aloud. It's a piece of him, she told Harry. Not a copy. A fragment of his actual soul, placed inside the object deliberately. The fragment is conscious. It has its own agenda and can direct creatures that respond to Slytherin's lineage. A pause. It can be destroyed. But only by something that could reach the anchor at the object's core and dissolve it at that level. Standard magic won't touch it. Harry looked at the diary on the table between them. What will? Basilisk venom, she said. The same creature it's been controlling. They looked at each other. I need to speak to it first, Harry said. Before anything else. The chamber entrance was in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, the sink with the serpent engraved on the tap. Harry stood before it and spoke to it in Parseltongue, and the sink descended, and the pipe opened, and they went down together into the oldest part of the castle. The part that had been sealed for 1,000 years, and had preserved the atmosphere of the moment of its closing. The basilisk came out of the dark at the far end of the chamber, 60 feet of it, ancient and enormous, orienting on heat rather than sight. Harry angled his mirror and kept his voice steady, and spoke not a command but a question, because Sirius had taught him the distinction years ago. You were given a new direction, Harry said in Parseltongue, by a voice in an object. Was that the direction you were originally given? The basilisk was still for a long moment. The original instruction was to guard, not hunt. Not hunt, it confirmed. The new voice changed it. The new voice is gone tonight, Harry said. After the object is destroyed, there is no new voice. Only the original instruction remains. The great head turned slowly. Guard all of them, Harry said. Every student. The school is for all of them. A long silence. The ambient magic of the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Then the basilisk lowered its head, not in submission, but in the sense of acknowledgement that very ancient things produced when they had heard something they intended to accept. A fang, shed at some point across the millennium of its residence and lying on the chamber floor, caught the faint ambient light 6 feet to Harry's left. He picked it up. He brought it to the diary. He drove it through the cover. What came out of the diary was not a scream exactly, more a quality of the air, the sensation of something coherent becoming incoherent, a will dissolving. The ink bled black, then gray, then nothing. Harry held the fang and looked at the silent pages and thought about what Hermione had said. A piece of him. The piece was gone. Whatever whole it had been a piece of was diminished by its absence, somewhere in the world, and that fact, small and quiet in this ancient chamber, felt like the first thread pulled from a knot that would eventually come entirely undone. He put the fang in his bag. Evidence, Lucius Malfoy's connection to the diary took Hermione 4 days to establish from the Black family's investigative archive, and 2 hours to present to Dumbledore with the unbroken chain of documentation she brought to every completed piece of work. Dumbledore listened to the evidence and then looked at it, and then looked at the 2 12-year-olds across his desk with the expression of someone who was consistently being surprised by people he had expected to surprise him and was still, somehow, not quite prepared for it. "The Board of Governors will need to see this," he said. "Sirius's seat will be present when they do," Harry said. The board session was a Thursday. Lucius Malfoy sat in his governor's seat and watched Hermione's evidence presented through Dumbledore. The same careful documentation, the same forensic chain, the same precise gap between what had been claimed and what the records showed, and produced no counter-evidence, because he had not accounted for the Black family archive existing, and had not accounted for a 12-year-old girl who had spent 3 years reading it. His seat was formally removed within the month. Ron heard the news at dinner and said nothing for a moment, just looked at Harry with an expression that was trying to be casual and failing. "My dad's he's going to have a lot of feelings about this," he finally said. "Good feelings," Harry said. "Very good feelings," Ron confirmed, and went back to his shepherd's pie with the contentment of someone whose family had been on the right side of something for once, and was quietly, intensely glad of it. Third year brought the Dementors. They arrived at Hogwarts on the first evening, stationed at the castle's entrances and the perimeter of the grounds. And their effect on the student population was immediate and consistent, and not discussed in any official capacity, because discussing it would have required acknowledging that placing soul-extracting creatures in proximity to 13-year-olds was a decision with consequences. Cornelius Fudge, who had authorized the deployment over Dumbledore's objection by routing it through the Board of Governors rather than the Wizengamot, because the board route was faster and less likely to produce an argument he would need to win, had apparently not extended his planning to include the question of what happened after. Harry had been building the file since September. Hermione had been building it since August, when she found the relevant section of the 1947 Azkaban Governance Act in the Black family's legal archive, and identified the gap between what the act required and what the minister had done. By November she had 17 documented incidents, each one cross-referenced against the Act's own definition of acceptable Dementor behavior, each one individually defensible and collectively impossible to defend. The file also contained a section on Dolores Umbridge. Umbridge was Senior Undersecretary to the Minister, a title that communicated proximity to authority without specifying its function, and whose function in practice was to move situations toward the Ministry's preferred outcomes without generating a record of the movement. She had been involved in the Dementor deployment, not visibly. The documentation of her involvement required reading 6 sets of Wizengamot minutes and identifying what had been removed between draft and final versions and what those removals had in common. Hermione had read all 6 sets. She had identified the pattern in the 4th week. The Wizengamot chamber smelled of old stone and older decisions. Harry had been in it twice before as an observer. Sirius had spent 3 weeks one summer walking him through the chamber's procedural history before he ever sat in the gallery, because Sirius believed that understanding a space before you needed to perform in it was not preparation, but survival. At 13, Harry and Hermione attended their first full session as proxy observers for House Black, a status almost nobody used because almost nobody registered heirs that young. The chamber's older members looked at 2 13-year-olds with the discomfort of people whose rules had been technically obeyed by a situation they had never anticipated. Harry and Hermione attended 6 sessions before speaking. The 7th session was different. The agenda included a routine review of Azkaban security protocols, an item that appeared every 2 years and produced the same 90-minute discussion and changed nothing. Albus Dumbledore presided in his capacity as Chief Warlock, his half-moon spectacles precisely placed, his expression the expression of a man conducting proceedings with the exact measure of authority required and no more. Sirius was in his seat. Fudge was in his ministerial position with Umbridge stationed 2 rows behind him. When Harry stood in the observer's gallery, the chamber's attention shifted with the feel of attention shifting towards something that was technically permitted and practically unprecedented. "Lord Black's proxy requests the floor," Harry said. Fudge looked at him with the expression of a man encountering a procedural situation he had not planned for. Dumbledore looked at the proxy documentation he had received at the session's opening, because Dumbledore read everything, always, which was itself a kind of power, and then looked at Harry like someone making a quiet internal update. "The proxy has the floor," Dumbledore said. Fudge made a sound. Dumbledore did not look at him. Harry spoke for 11 minutes without notes. 17 incidents, the 1947 Act's requirements, the deployment's violations, the reason the review needed an independent committee rather than the ministry reviewing itself. He concluded. He sat, The chamber was quiet, with the feel of a room that had received an argument it could not immediately refute. Griselda Marchbanks, head of wizarding examinations, a Wizengamot member of 40 years standing, whose opinion on procedural matters carried weight precisely because she was known to have no political allegiances worth purchasing, rose from her seat and formally seconded the motion. The chamber recognized the seconding with the feel of an institution whose own rules had been turned, very correctly, back upon itself. The vote was 38-15. The review committee was appointed before the session ended, in the window that Dumbledore opened immediately after the vote, before the chamber's momentum dissipated into procedural delay. 6 members, none of whom reported to Fudge. In the corridor afterward, Umbridge materialized beside Harry with the geometry of someone who had miscalculated a corridor's width. "Interesting motion," she said, in the tone that made interesting mean something else entirely. "Thank you," Harry said. She waited for more. He did not provide more. She walked away with the controlled pace of someone whose composure was doing significant structural work. "She'll try to influence the committee findings," Hermione said. "I know," Harry said. "Dumbledore will notice." "He noticed everything in that room," Hermione said. "Yes, that's why he needed to be in the chair." Sirius appeared from the chamber doorway with the satisfaction of a man who had watched something land precisely where it had been aimed. "You could have smiled," he said, "at least once." "Smiling changes the tone," Harry said. "It does," Sirius agreed, his hand on Harry's shoulder. "Lunch, you can be solemn about the procedural victory over food." They were not solemn over food. Remus ordered enough for 4 people, and told a story about the time he and Sirius had accidentally convinced a ministry official in their Auror training year that the entire Department of Magical Law Enforcement operated on a different calendar, and Ron Weasley, who had been invited because Sirius believed that the people Harry valued should be fed regularly, laughed until he knocked over his pumpkin juice and didn't mind at all. The Triwizard Tournament was announced at the start of 4th year, and Sirius had the founding charter in hand before the term's first weekend was over. Not the current operating version, the original, a 43-page document written in a legal style that predated the ministry's standardization efforts by 3 centuries, and was consequently harder to read and more precise in its definitions. Sirius had found it in the Black family archive the previous winter, filed between 2 14th-century land dispute texts, the way documents placed by someone who understood that obscurity was a better protection than destruction. He had been sitting on it since the announcement, waiting to see whether the tournament was real. When Dumbledore confirmed it at the opening feast, Sirius sent a one-line owl to Adrienne Voss that said only, "Page 31. The clause addressed paired entry. Not explicitly, 14th-century legal drafting preferred absolute precision arrived at through deliberate indirection, the assumption being that the reader was as intelligent as the writer. What it established, in the language of houses rather than individuals, was the right of bonded house heirs to enter the tournament as a single submission representing a single magical house, in cases where the bonding relationship predated the tournament's formal rules by sufficient time to constitute a prior claim. Hermione's Ward of Association status, formalized when she was 6 years old, predated their entry to Hogwarts by 5 years. Adrienne Voss spent 4 days with the charter and returned a 6-page opinion. The argument was sound. There were 2 procedural vulnerabilities, and here was how to close both before they became problems. The vulnerabilities were addressed. The submission, 12 pages, sealed with the House Black sigil. Addressed to the goblet itself in its capacity as a binding magical contract authority, was prepared over the following week. They submitted on a Tuesday evening when the entrance hall had cleared. Harry held the document at the edge of the age line Dumbledore had drawn around the goblet's plinth, a thin gold circle, clean and absolute. He did not step over it. He held the document out at the line's boundary. The goblet's flame, blue-white for 3 days, shifted to amber, the amber of old magic encountering older law and finding the older law coherent. The document moved from Harry's hand without him crossing the line. The flame took it. The flame returned to blue-white. "It accepted," Hermione said. "The charter is the contract," Harry said. "The goblet enforces the contract. If the charter permits it, the goblet accepts it." "Dumbledore is going to want an explanation," she said. Tomorrow, Harry said. He'll have one. Dumbledore's response, the following morning in his office with the document on the desk between them, was not the resistance Harry had prepared for. Not the principled objection of a man with legitimate concerns about 14-year-olds entering a tournament with a documented history of fatalities. It was something closer to quiet resignation, and resignation was more complicated than objection, because it suggested that the man across the desk had looked at the same board and reached the same conclusion about where the pieces were going, and had simply arrived there first. Page 31, Dumbledore said. The bonded house heir provision. Yes, Harry said. The goblet accepted it, Dumbledore said, setting the document down like someone setting something down they are not going to pick back up. We thought that would resolve the question of validity, Hermione said. The goblet resolves that question, Dumbledore agreed. He looked at the window for a moment. Sirius has been planning this since he found the charter. Since the announcement, Harry said. He's thorough. He is, Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone for whom that particular quality produced complicated feelings. On Halloween, the goblet produced 4 names. Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts. Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons, who received the announcement with the composed grace of someone for whom being selected was the expected outcome rather than a surprise. Victor Krum for Durmstrang, who stood with the stillness of someone accustomed to large rooms paying attention to him, and had made his peace with it long ago. Then the goblet went amber again. The parchment it produced had 2 names. Dumbledore read them and looked at Harry and Hermione. House Black. Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. Karkaroff's objection was immediate, loud, and technically coherent. 4 champions, not 5. The tournament did not permit 5. 4 entries, Hermione said, before the objection completed itself. House Black submitted 1 entry containing 2 champions. The founding charter distinguishes between entries and champions. 4 entries was always the rule. The number of champions is 5. The goblet has confirmed the entry's validity. Karkaroff looked at Dumbledore. She's correct, Dumbledore said. The charter distinguishes between entries and champions. The submission stands. Cedric Diggory, standing beside Harry in the champion's antechamber afterward, looked at him with the quiet assessment of someone reappraising a prior impression significantly upward. Cedric was 17, broad-shouldered, possessed of a natural ease with people that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with genuine interest. He extended his hand. Properly done, he said. Thank you, Harry said, and shook it. 1 question, Cedric said. Go ahead. Are you actually going to try to win, or is there something else going on? Harry looked at him for a moment. Both, he said. Cedric considered this. Right, he said. I'd like to know what the something else is, if that's on offer. When there's enough to tell, Harry said. I'll tell you. Rita Skeeter arrived the following morning with her quick quotes quill already active, and the momentum of someone who had identified a story and was moving toward it before the story had time to become more complicated than she needed it to be. She found Harry and Hermione in the corridor outside the champion's waiting room, deployed her warmest professional register, and did not notice Hermione's hand moving into her bag. Hermione had identified Skeeter's animagus status in the November of 2nd year through the Black family's animagus detection texts and the recurring presence of a large beetle in locations that had no logical reason to contain one. She had been waiting for the right moment to use the information. The right moment was when Skeeter's quick quotes quill began writing a sentence about Sirius that had not been spoken aloud. She could see the quill's angle, the trajectory of a narrative being constructed rather than reported. Before we continue, Hermione said, I want to be certain your recording methods are authorized. Skeeter's quill paused. Your quick quotes quill is standard, Hermione said pleasantly. The other method isn't. She produced a glass jar, plain, ministry specification animagus containment, modified at the rim with a runic treatment that was visible as a faint geometric pattern if you knew what you were looking at. If you'd like to confirm that your current form is your only form, you're welcome to step inside. For verification purposes. The corridor was very quiet. I don't know what you think. The jar does nothing at all to a witch who isn't an unregistered animagus, Hermione said. You'd step in, step out, and we'd all have confirmed what we already knew. She held it like someone who had no particular investment in whether it was used. Or, you can show me your registered animagus documentation. Skeeter's expression was the expression of someone who had arrived with a trap and found themselves standing in one. I'll need to speak with my editor, she said. Of course, Hermione said. Skeeter left. The quill went with her. You've had that jar since second year, Harry said. Since November of second year. I was waiting for the right moment. Was this it? She was building an angle on Sirius. I could see it in the quill's movement before she'd said a word. She put the jar back in her bag. This was the right moment. They had known about the graveyard since February. Not with certainty, with the feel of inference that arrived when you had been tracking a problem long enough that its shape became legible before its details did. Wormtail was moving. East, his intervals were becoming less irregular, which was the pattern of someone whose caution was being eroded by proximity to a goal. Sirius had been tracking him since autumn through the Marauder's map, still in his possession, kept from the night of Peter's capture, the map responding to the 4 names of its makers because its magic was tied to intention, and Sirius's intention had not changed since he made it. The route the map outlined, cross-referenced with Hermione's intelligence on Bartemius Crouch Jr., whose presence in the tournament's logistics she had been documenting since September, ended at Little Hangleton, a graveyard adjacent to a church at the village's eastern boundary. The Riddle family plot, northeast corner. Sirius visited the village in March, alone and in dog form, for 2 days. He came back with the feel of attention he had when he had identified something he needed help with and was working out how to ask. Harry asked for him, which was what Harry did when Sirius was taking too long to reach the asking. The planning session happened in the Grimold Place kitchen over Easter. Sirius and Remus on one side, Harry and Hermione on the other. A hand-drawn map of Little Hangleton between them. The plan had one premise that required the most time to establish: let the ritual complete. We could prevent it, Sirius said, on the third circuit of the argument. Take Wormtail before the task. We prevent this ritual, Harry said. He finds another method. We know what this version produces. We know the body it makes, how strong, what it can and cannot do. We know how to address that. We don't know how to address a version that had time to plan differently. He held Sirius's gaze. We know how to end this specific thing. We end it here. Sirius looked at the map for a long time. I don't like it, he said. I know, Harry said. I don't like it either. Sirius and Remus spent 4 days preparing the graveyard's approaches. Hermione spent 3 nights inscribing a containment array beneath the Riddle family plot. 2 functions. Seal the space after the ritual completed, activate on a 3-word sequence. On the morning of the 3rd task, Harry told Cedric, not everything. Enough. He sat across from him in the champion's waiting room and said, the cup is a portkey. It goes to a graveyard. When we arrive, stay close and don't act before I do. Cedric looked at him. You've known since February. Yes, and you're telling me now because you need me to trust you in the next 6 hours. I'm telling you now, Harry said, because you deserve to know. Cedric was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. Close to you. Don't act first. They took the cup together. The graveyard arrived with the lurch of portkey transit. Harry landed on his feet. Cedric landed 2 feet to his left and steadied quickly, reading the environment in the same window that Harry was reading it. Dark, cold, the smell of earth and old stone, and Wormtail already at the cauldron with the components arranged in the careful sequence of someone who had practiced this. The thing in Wormtail's arms said, "Hold him." Wormtail raised his wand. Harry's shield was already up. In the window between Wormtail's cast and his recovery, Harry spoke the 3-word activation sequence to the ground beneath his feet. The containment array came alive in sections: the southwest, the west, the south. The northeast quadrant didn't close. Harry felt it through the soles of his feet. The ground there had been broken recently, a new grave dug shallow enough that the earth still held the memory of disruption, and the inscription hadn't seated properly in disturbed soil. 3/4 of a boundary where he had planned for a whole one. He looked at Cedric. Cedric had already seen it. He moved to the northeast without being told. Sirius and Remus came in from the north, separated by 30 feet, angles chosen to eliminate friendly fire risk, moving with the economy of people who had done dangerous things before and had learned that unnecessary motion was unnecessary risk. Sirius moved as a man, tonight, not a dog, because what came next required hands. Wormtail saw him and his face did the thing it had done in the London alley 13 years ago. The collapse of someone who had believed themselves safe encountering the evidence that they were not. Remus bound him before he could complete a second cast. The same Black family cord from the same pocket where it had lived since that London alley, blood keyed, waiting for its second use. The bundle fell from Wormtail's arms. What landed in the grass was the fragment of will that had been surviving in inadequate vessels since the night it had failed to kill a baby in Godric's Hollow. Small, dark, furious, the cold of something that had been refusing to die for 50 years and had built the refusal into its remaining structure. "You prepared for this," it said, taking in the sealed graveyard, the array in the earth. "Since February," Harry said. A silence. "Clever children." "We had good teachers," Harry said. Cedric stood at the cauldron's edge and watched the suppression working take effect. Hermione's construction from the Black family's soul-binding texts, applied by Sirius and Remus across 4 methodical minutes, and watched the thing in the grass encounter a constraint it had not expected, and find that the constraint held. Manageable. That was the operative condition. Later, Cedric said quietly, "You are going to explain all of this to me." "When there's time," Harry said. For the first time in a long time, the shape of the future contained it. The suppression held for 6 months. Hermione had been clear about this from the beginning, in the kitchen planning sessions before Little Hangleton, in the debrief sessions after, in the documentation she produced with the same quality she brought to everything. Organized and sourced and clearly explained, because clarity in dark matters was more important than managed disclosure. The suppression was a containment, not a solution. It reduced the remaining fragment's capacity to direct external action and prevented accumulation of new strength, but it addressed the symptom rather than the cause. The cause was structural. The cause was the Horcruxes. 6 of them, or had been. The diary was gone, destroyed in the chamber 2 years ago, which left 5 objects. Hermione had been building the identification file since 3rd year, working from the Black family's dark arts texts and the theoretical framework the diary had provided. The diary had been the first one she encountered, and it had given her the template for recognizing the others. By autumn, the file had 5 entries. By winter, 4 had confirmed locations. By spring, all 5 did. She presented the complete file in the Grimmauld Place kitchen on a February evening, with Sirius and Remus at the table and Harry across from her, the file open between them and a pot of tea going cold because nobody had thought to drink it. She was 3 pages in when she stopped. "There's something else," she said. The kitchen was quiet. "The night Voldemort's killing curse rebounded in Godric's Hollow," she said, and her voice had the quality it had when she was delivering findings she had confirmed past the point of doubt and did not find comfortable. The soul fragment that was powering the curse needed somewhere to go when the curse failed. It needed an anchor. The nearest living vessel with sufficient magical capacity was, she looked at Harry. Harry looked back at her. "Me," he said. Not a question. "You," she said. The silence had weight. Remus set down his teacup. Sirius looked at the table, then at Harry. "It explains the Parseltongue," Harry said, after a moment. "Yes," Hermione said. "And the connection to him, the way you've felt his emotional states since Little Hangleton. The fragment is why. It's been there since you were 15 months old." She paused. "I've been reading every soul fragment text in the archive for 3 months. The good news is that the dissolution working we've been building for the final confrontation, the one designed to unwind what remains of his soul, it doesn't distinguish between the fragments outside his body and the one inside yours. If the working reaches all of them simultaneously, which is what it's designed to do, the anchor in you dissolves with the rest. And if it doesn't reach all of them simultaneously," Sirius said. His voice was controlled in the way it was controlled when the control was doing significant work. "Then we adjust the working until it does," Hermione said. "I'm not presenting this as an unsolvable problem. I'm presenting it as a problem we solve before we move." Sirius looked at Harry for a long moment. "You're not," he began. I'm not going to walk into a forest and let him kill me, if that's where you're going, Harry said, with the directness he used when he needed Sirius to hear something completely. That's not what this is. Hermione has built a working that addresses all of it together. We test it until it's right, and then we use it. How long to make it right? Remus said. Hermione looked at her notes. 2 months. If we start now. They started that evening. The 5 objects took the remaining winter and the better part of spring. The locket was first, and it was the one that cost the most, not in danger, in weight. Sirius had known since the conversation with Creature 2 years ago that the locket was already here, already in the house, already kept in the small room beneath the stairs, wrapped in a tea-cloth that had belonged to Regulus and which Creature had never washed. He had known, and he had not yet fully integrated what he knew, which was that his younger brother, the brother he had written off, the brother he had grieved as a loss long before his actual death, the Death Eater who had gone to his grave as a cautionary tale about what happened to black family children who did not run, had changed his mind in the last year of his life and had died trying to do something about it. They brought Creature to the table for a second time. All 4 of them. And Creature told it more completely this time. Every detail of the cave, the terrible potion, the basin and the lake and the things in the water, and Regulus going back alone after. The thing he had said when he sent Creature home, go back to the house and hide the locket, and never tell my brother. The last instruction delivered not as cruelty but as the mercy of someone who understood that Sirius was the kind of person who would have gone back to that cave himself. He knew you'd go back for it, Remus said quietly, across the table. Sirius looked at Creature and looked at the locket and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, he was wrong about the Death Eaters. He was right about everything else. He picked up the locket. Let's finish what he started. Basilisk venom from the preserved fang in Harry's bag, kept since the chamber, kept specifically because Hermione had said keep it, and she was always right about what to keep, drove through the locket's casing in a controlled, documented process that Hermione supervised with the same precision she brought to all of it. The fragment that screamed out of it was smaller than the diaries, dimmer, like an ember compared to a flame. It went out. Creature watched it go with the expression of someone who had been carrying a thing for a long time and had finally been permitted to set it down. He did not speak. He went to his room beneath the stairs and came back 10 minutes later with a tray of tea, made correctly, without being asked. Sirius looked at the tray and then at Remus and said nothing, because some things did not benefit from being spoken. The cup came through Gringotts, through the legal channels Sirius had been constructing since the exoneration. The documented evidence of the cup's unlawful storage in the Lestrange vault provided to Gringotts' own security division, who considered unauthorized deposits a violation of banking protocol sufficient to authorize a retrieval without requiring anyone to break in. The goblins who processed the paperwork were efficient and unbothered, people whose professional satisfaction came from correct procedure rather than dramatic action. The ring came from the Gaunt Shack. A joint operation because the curse required 2 people, and because Sirius had decided he was not sitting at home while Harry went alone into dark magic. The curse on the ring, Harry had said, in the planning session. I know what the curse is, Sirius said. I read Hermione's notes. It needs 2 people to manage the containment, while the other applies the venom. I'm 1 person. Remus has the moon in 4 days, Sirius said. I'm 1 person. We go together. They went together. The curse on the ring reached for Sirius's hand and found the Black family's containment protocols around it instead, built that afternoon from the archive's 3rd volume. Harry applied the venom. The fragment dissolved with less noise than the others, as though whatever had been in it had been waiting, reduced across decades of fragmentation to almost nothing. The stones set into it, Sirius said, looking at the ring on the shack's rotting floor. Don't, Harry said, reading his face. I wasn't going to, Sirius said, which was not quite true, and they both knew it. They left the stone where it lay, and didn't discuss it further. The diadem came through Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady of Ravenclaw Tower, who had been waiting for someone to ask her the right question for the better part of a millennium. Hermione asked it. The exchange between them had the ease of 2 people who recognized something in each other that had no precise name. The recognition of those who had made significant mistakes in service of the need to know things, and had been living with the weight of those mistakes long enough to have built something from them. Helena told her where the diadem was. Hermione retrieved it from the room of requirement. The venom addressed it cleanly. 4 down. Nagini and the fragment and Harry remaining. The dissolution working was tested through February and March on constructed runic analogues of soul fragments. Harry was the anchor point. He practiced not until he could do it, but until he could do it under pressure, half exhausted, with something going wrong. In the 4th week of testing, something went right, in a way that went beyond right. Harry stood at the working center and felt the dissolution reach through the constructed analogues, and felt it reach further, past the constructed fragments, into something real and small and lodged somewhere behind his left eye that he had never been able to locate precisely because it had always been part of him rather than something inside him. He stepped out of the working immediately. "I felt it," he said. Hermione looked up from her notation. "The fragment in me." The working reached it. She set down the quill. "How far?" "Far enough to know it's there," he said. "Far enough to know the working can reach it. Not far enough to address it. Not yet." "But Hermione," he looked at her directly. "It's going to work." She looked at him for a moment, with the expression she had in the very specific circumstances of a solution she had built and tested and theorized about arriving at the first proof of its own validity. Then she picked up the quill and began writing. Sirius found Harry on the training room floor that evening, sitting against the padded wall with his eyes open and the sense of stillness he had when he was integrating something significant. Sirius sat down beside him, without speaking. The practice floor's sprung wood held them both, the same floor Harry had been falling on since he was 6 years old, learning to fall correctly, learning that the floor was not the enemy and that the impact was not the end. "Remus says the working is ready," Sirius said after a while. "Hermione says 2 more weeks," Harry said. "She's right. Remus is optimistic." "Remus is always optimistic," Sirius said. "It's one of his most inconvenient qualities." A pause. The fragment. In you. "It's been there since I was 15 months old," Harry said. "I've been thinking about whether it changes anything. Does it?" Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," he said. "It means the working needs to reach me too. Hermione has accounted for that. What it doesn't change is what we do next or why we do it." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would have found this in 2 days," he said. "The Horcrux in you. She'd have found it and had a solution in 2 days and been insufferably calm about it." "I know," Harry said. "You're insufferably calm about it too." "I had a good teacher," Harry said. Sirius looked at the ceiling of the training room. The same ceiling that had been above them for a decade of Tuesday and Thursday evenings, above every fall and every correction and every slow, grinding, irreplaceable piece of building that had gone into making Harry the person who could sit against this wall at 16 and talk about a fragment of Dark Lord's soul inside him with the settled quality of someone who had already decided what they were going to do about it. 2 more weeks, Sirius said. 2 more weeks, Harry confirmed. They sat in the training room in the quiet of a house that had learned, slowly and with considerable effort, to be warm. Outside, London went about its business. Inside, the working waited. He came on a Thursday in May, at the hour just before dawn when the castle was darkest, and the grounds were the particular quiet of a place that had not yet decided what kind of day it was going to be. Harry felt him arrive through Hogwarts wards, not as an alarm, not as noise, but as a quality of the ambient magic contracting, the way warmth left a room before the cold was consciously registered. He had felt this cold in Quirrell's classroom 5 years ago. In the chamber. In the graveyard. Each time it had been a version of the same thing, and each time he had known it for what it was. He was out of bed before the feeling completed itself. "He's at the gates," Harry said, in the darkness of the dormitory. Ron was already sitting up. He had developed, across 5 years of proximity to Harry and Hermione, a reliable instinct for the sense of silence that preceded something significant. "Go," Ron said, reaching for his wand with the unhesitating quality of someone who had decided a long time ago which side of things he was on and had never revisited the decision. "I'll get the others. Neville, the Da." Harry went. Voldemort came through the gates with what remained of his Death Eaters, perhaps 30, the ones who had stayed after Little Hangleton, after the suppression. After the months of Horcrux disappearances, he had felt as a progressive loss of something he had not known he depended on until it was gone. The presence he carried had the feeling of something that had been contained and released at a moment of its own choosing, not stronger than before, but present in the way of things that had been held back and were no longer. He found the courtyard not empty. Harry stood at its center. Hermione stood 12 feet to his left, the dissolution workings anchor framework already active in her hands. The runic architecture she had spent 4 months perfecting visible as a faint geometric tension in the air around her, invisible to most, legible to anyone who knew what structured magic looked like at the moment of deployment. Cedric Diggory stood at the courtyard's eastern entrance with 6 members of the Da behind him, wands drawn, positioned not to attack but to hold, to ensure that the Death Eaters flanking Voldemort remained flanking Voldemort and did not redistribute into the space where the working required room to operate. He had been briefed completely 2 weeks ago. In the Hogwarts library over 4 hours with Hermione's documentation spread across 2 tables, and he had listened to all of it and asked precise questions and said, "At the end, I understand what you need from me. I'll do it. No performance. No negotiation." That was Cedric. "You've been dismantling what I built," Voldemort said, his gaze moving across the courtyard like someone reading a space and finding the reading unpleasant. "Yes," Harry said, "piece by piece, without announcing yourself." "Announcing yourself to your enemy before you're finished is a planning error," Harry said. "You established that principle yourself. 13 years building toward a return, no announcement until the return was accomplished. The methodology was sound. We adapted it." Something moved in Voldemort's expression. Recognition, the particular quality of someone encountering in an opponent a quality they would have respected in an ally, and finding the recognition unwelcome precisely because it was genuine. "The snake," he said, already addressed. He turned. At the courtyard's edge, beyond the ring of Death Eaters, Sirius stood in the stillness of a man who had just completed a transition, back to human form from the dog that had moved through the line of Death Eaters as prey rather than threat, as something Nagini's wariness did not extend to, as the one shape in this courtyard that could reach the snake before the snake registered the approach. Nagini lay on the ground beside him, alive, her great body still, with the feeling of something from which something else had been removed. The last external Horcrux fragment was gone. The snake herself breathed. Sirius had kept her alive deliberately. She was not the enemy, had never been the enemy, had been used as an anchor the same way everything in Voldemort's orbit had been used. "Lord Black," Voldemort said, in the tone of someone updating a significant assumption. "Lord Black," Sirius confirmed from the courtyard's edge. "There's a difference from what you're used to." Voldemort raised his wand. Harry was already moving, not toward Voldemort, but inward, stepping into the dissolution workings framework the way he had stepped into it in the training room across 2 months of preparation. The working was not combat magic. It was dissolution magic, the technique from the Black family's oldest texts for addressing a soul that had been fragmented enough times that what remained was not a person, but a persistence, and that could be unwound if you understood the structure you were unwinding and approached it from the correct direction. Hermione held the framework. Harry moved through it. He felt the working reach outward, felt it find the fragments it was looking for, the remaining pieces of a will that had survived decades by refusing every form of its own ending. He felt it find the Death Eater contingent wavering as Cedric's held position, felt Sirius moving along the courtyard's edge, felt Remus on the parapet above. All of it the coordinated function of people who had rehearsed their roles until the roles were as natural as breathing. Then he felt the working reach inward. It reached past the magic in his hands and the occlumency architecture in his mind, and found the thing behind his left eye that had been part of him since before he could remember being anything, the fragment that had given him Parseltongue and a connection he had never asked for to the mind of the darkest wizard of the age. The working reached it and held it, and for one very specific moment Harry understood what it was to have something foreign inside you that had been there so long it felt native. He let it go. Voldemort raised his wand and spoke the beginning of a curse, and Remus's stunner from the eastern parapet took him before the curse completed. Not sufficient to end the working, but sufficient to shatter the concentration required to maintain the shield he had been building against what Harry was doing, and in the window that the stunner opened. The dissolution working completed its final movement. Not dramatically. Not with the noise of something destroyed. With the quiet of something that had been refusing for 50 years, encountering the ending it had refused, and finding at the end of everything it had built and broken and sacrificed and fragmented itself across, that the building had not been sufficient. That what it had made of itself was not enough to outlast the patient, unglamorous, loving work of the people standing in this courtyard. The body did not fall dramatically. It simply stopped. The cold lifted in stages, first from the courtyard's immediate air, then from the wider grounds, then from something that had no location Harry could name, but that he had been feeling at the edge of his awareness for as long as he could remember. The Death Eaters stood in the stillness of people watching the structure that had organized their lives resolve into an answer to the question of what it looked like from the outside, when it ended. It looked like this. Harry stood at the courtyard's center and tried, once, to find it, the part that had always known how to shape serpent speech, the thing that had been there since before he could remember being anything. He reached for it the way you reached for a word you'd known all your life, ordinary silence. He stood there for a moment with that silence, which was different from other silences. Sirius reached him before Cedric did. He didn't say anything. He stood beside Harry and looked at the same space Harry was looking at and waited, because Sirius understood the difference between silence that needed filling and silence that needed witness. "It's gone," Harry said after a while. "The parcel tongue. Yes," a pause. "I didn't know how much of it was mine. I thought..." He stopped. "I'd had it my whole life. I thought it was mine." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Some of it probably was," he said. "The fragment amplified what was already there. That's how those anchors work. They use what they find." He looked at Harry. "That doesn't mean none of it was yours." Harry considered this. He did not find it immediately comforting, which was fine, because Sirius had not said it to comfort him. He had said it because it was true, and Harry had always preferred true things. "I'll need time with it," Harry said. "Yes," Sirius said. "You will!" Cedric crossed the courtyard and stood beside Harry, looking at what had ended, and did not say anything for a moment. Then, all of it was real, wasn't it? Every piece of it. "Every piece," Harry said. Sirius crossed the courtyard from the other direction, and stopped beside Harry, and looked at what had ended, and said, "It's done." "Yes," Harry said. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Sirius put his arm around Harry's shoulders, and Harry let him, which was not something Harry often permitted, because it required the vulnerability of accepting that being held was something he needed. And Sirius did not comment on it because Sirius understood that the not commenting was the point. Neville arrived from the castle's main doors with the Da behind him, Trevor the Toad inexplicably present in his breast pocket, and looked at the courtyard and then at Harry with an expression that was trying to find the right word for what had just happened and settling, finally, on a simple, "Done?" "Done," Harry said. Neville exhaled and turned to the Da and gave a single nod, and what passed through the group in response to that nod was the feeling that moved through people when something enormous concluded and the world was still there on the other side of it. Still ordinary, still continuing. Ron appeared from a side entrance at a run, assessed the scene, found Harry upright, and stopped running with the visible relief of someone who had been genuinely frightened and was integrating the fact that the fear was now past tense. He looked at Cedric, at Sirius, at the Death Eaters now sitting disarmed on the courtyard stones under Remus's oversight. "Right," Ron said, which contained more than any longer statement would have. 5 years later, on a September morning that was doing nothing dramatic, Grimmauld Place smelled of coffee, and something Remus was burning on the stove with the cheerful incompetence he brought to everything that wasn't tea. Harry's desk in the library was organized spatially, materials arranged to reflect the relationship between ideas. Hermione's desk operated on her dependency system, each object positioned in the logical chain it belonged to. The wall above her desk was covered in runic notation that had been the foundation of a 17-volume proposal that had passed through the Wizengamot in 4 votes across a single October session. Dissolution of the Blood Status Registry, Azkaban reform, restructured education funding. and the permanent oversight committee that made the first three irreversible. 39-14 on the final vote. Dumbledore, still Chief Warlock, had read the motion documents in advance, and had presided with the measured authority of someone who recognized the work that had gone into them, and understood that the correct role in this particular moment was to hold the chamber steady and let the argument speak for itself. He had looked at Harry and Hermione at the session's close with the expression of someone who had been outpaced by people he had expected to advise, and had found the experience, unexpectedly, genuinely, something close to satisfaction. The morning they walked into the Ministry for the 5th anniversary review of the Oversight Committee, Lucius Malfoy was in the atrium. He saw Harry. He saw Hermione. He conducted his rapid assessment and reached its consistent conclusion and walked in the other direction without speaking. Hermione was already reading the agenda. Harry watched Sirius and Remus walk ahead of them down the Ministry corridor, Sirius talking with his hands, which was what he did when he was feeling something language couldn't quite hold. Remus listening with the patient attention of someone who had been listening to Sirius Black for 30 years, and had never once considered it a burden. Sirius looked back, found Harry's face in the corridor. His expression had the quality it had on the best mornings at Grimmauld Place, Lord Black releasing into something older. He looked like the man who had stood in a ruined cottage on a cold November morning and made a vow to the impression left in silk where a child had been. The vow had been about what Harry would not be. Not afraid, not alone, not shaped by the absence of the people who were supposed to show up. Harry was not those things. He was other things instead. Things built in a house that had learned to be warm, in a training room with a sprung floor over slate, in 17 volumes of documented evidence, and a Wizengamot gallery, and a graveyard at midnight, and every breakfast table, and every Tuesday and Thursday evening across 16 years of deliberate, patient, sometimes painful building. Well, Sirius said, from ahead of him in the corridor. Yes, Harry said. That was enough. It had always been enough. They walked out into the September morning, all four of them, and the morning received them without fanfare, without ceremony, with only the ordinary continuing of a world that had been changed and would stay changed. Hermione put the agenda in her bag. She would finish the notation at home, at her desk in the library at Grimmauld Place, in the house that had learned across years and effort and love to be exactly what it had never been before. Warm. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.